If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Grainger understands that you go to great lengths and sometimes heights to ensure the power is always flowing, which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello everyone, this is Robin Warder, host of the true crime podcast, The Trail Went Cold. If you grew up watching the classic television show Unsolved Mysteries, then this is the podcast for you. Each week, I profile a new unsolved murder or missing persons case and share all the baffling details. Afterward, I provide my own personal analysis and theories about what might have happened. This is a show for true crime buffs who are fascinated by cold cases and love to discuss them and pick them apart in an attempt to figure out the truth. So be sure to check out our podcast to learn about some truly bizarre unsolved mysteries where the trail went cold.
You're listening to Scene of the Crime, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, and 3 Men and a Mystery. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Let's resume our discussion of the investigation on the ground in Roger and Rose's hometown of St. Joseph. St. Joseph police went to work digging into Roger and Rose's background and family relationships. Because investigators weren't able to determine whether Roger and Rose had been deliberately targeted by their killer for personal reasons, or were randomly selected by a murderer unconnected to them in any way, this background investigation was crucial to investigators' understanding of the crime. Here is Paul Holes.
When I first got involved with this case, that was my primary focus. I'm now paying attention to, okay, so we've got this affair going on. Can I discern, based on the offender's behaviors towards each victim, who was the target? Who was the focus? That might give me insight as to what side, which family side or friends circle would I be investigatively putting my energies towards, at least initially. This is a case involving passion, interpersonal relationships, or is this a stranger?
As Margie Lowry succinctly put it,
there were a lot of silly circumstances that made it difficult to take and decide whether or not, yes, it was somebody that we didn't know or somebody we did know.
Investigators began the time-consuming process of interviewing the friends, family, colleagues, and acquaintances of the 2 young people. And Roger and Rose had a lot of stuff going on in their lives that investigators had to unpack. There were some perplexing and disturbing things on both Roger's side and Rose's side of the equation. Let's get into the personal details that investigators uncovered, which made this case extremely convoluted and difficult to solve. Investigators put together a basic bio of Rose. She was a young single mother. She was between jobs, having left La Verna Village nursing home after 3 years. She was scheduled to begin a new one at Methodist Hospital and take nursing classes. She had been seeing married man Roger Atkinson for several months. Reports from people who knew Rose were that she was friendly and she was not the type to get involved with a wild crowd or to get involved in drugs. Here is her best friend, Vicki Ruoff.
She came to my school in 7th or 8th grade. And then we went all through high school together and ran around together after high school up until her death. And we spent weekends together because she lived not far from me. So we got to be like sisters. If you had Rosie for a friend, you pretty much had a really good friend for life. I mean, anyway, I did. She was, if I needed her or wanted her for anything, she was always there without question. And I just loved her. She was such an awesome person, I thought. And she would stand up for what was right. And if something was not right, she would also take issue with that. But she just really, to me, she was a very caring person.
Rose had a long-term boyfriend in high school named Dean Taylor, who her family had thought she would marry. But instead, she and Dean called it quits, and in her late teens, Rose had a short-lived relationship with a Frank Pierce, who lived on a Native American reservation in Kansas. And from this dalliance came her daughter, Rachel. Frank was not a part of Rose and Rachel's lives. In fact, Rose's sister Margie Lowry told us that Frank had never even seen his child. Rose went on to date several other men and to be serious with at least 2 of them. One of these was a man named Jack Enochs, who worked at the local psychiatric hospital with Rose's sister Margie. Jack and Rose lived together for a time, and Jack gave Rose an engagement ring, but things didn't work out between the 2 of them. Margie intimated that he had a wandering eye. Jack and Rose stayed friends, and after Rose's murder, Jack connected at her funeral with Rose's friend and roommate for a time, Tammy Howard Berkman, and the 2 ended up married for a time. Jack was easygoing and well-liked by everyone, according to Margie, and he also had an alibi for the night of September 12, 1980. He was at work at the hospital where Margie personally saw him that night. Vicki told us that Rose had a relationship with one man who became abusive.
I know there was one relationship she was in, but he was abusive, and she got out of it. I helped her get away from him, and he did end up moving and left her alone. So, yeah, she confided quite a bit in me. Rosie was a sweetheart. She was a very good person. I think she was not wise in her choice of men.
Rose went on to have another serious relationship with a man named Danny B. Their breakup in late spring of 1980 was not on good terms. We will discuss Danny at length in a future episode. Rose was selective in who she told about her affair with Roger. It seems that most of her co-workers, like Joanna, Susie, and Shirley, knew about it, but her close friends and family did not. They would not have approved. We know that Tammy Howard Berkman, who was close with Rose in high school and afterwards, was not aware of the affair. Here is Tammy.
We went to school together, starting in middle school, and we became friends, all through high school and everything. And after high school, we shared an apartment. We lived together around a year, I guess it was, and we worked together. We worked at the same place too. So we did just about everything together. She was like a sister to me. We were really, really close when I got married. She was my maid of honor, and I got married in June of 1979.
Yet Tammy told us,
I did not know about Roger. It surprised me because I would have said she'd never do that. And I still say, some people say that he was just using her, that he did it over and over with all these girls. And then other people say, well, he really cared about her and her daughter, and he was, unhappy in his marriage and wanted a divorce. And I don't know what his heart was saying, but I would say the only way she would have been seeing him was if she thought his marriage was over and they were going to, be together, because she wouldn't have been like the mistress or the other woman. She would have not ever done anything like that. And, if he told her, I'm getting a divorce, I'm not happy with Marcy anymore or whatever, then that's, if she trusted him and believed him, she would have, probably took a chance to see if that's, if he followed through.
Tammy did not have any idea that Rose had gone to Iowa. She happened to be watching the news on Sunday the 14th after church services.
When I heard it on the news, and I remember exactly what they said on the news, they said there's 2 St. Joseph residents been found brutally slain in an Iowa motel. And so we were all like, oh, we better listen to this. It went to a commercial break. And when it came back, it said that again, and then they named them. And I was like, his name didn't mean anything. And I know when they said her name, I just kind of sat there and I looked up and everybody was looking at me, everybody in the house. And my mom, my stepmom, she said, did they just say Rose's name? And I said, is that what they said? Because it just couldn't be in my head. I couldn't comprehend it. And I was like, well, it couldn't be her, because why would she be in Iowa? So I got up and I went to the phone, ran into the phone, and I called a girl that we worked with before. And I think that she, I figured she had been working with her and stuff, so she'd know. She'd probably talk to her just at work. And when I called, whoever it was that answered the phone knew it was me, because I heard him say, hey, Susie, come here. It's Tammy, and she needs to talk to you. Well, when she's on the phone, I could tell that I said, I just heard the news, or just was watching the news, and she said, yes, Tammy, it was Rosie. And I could tell she kind of started crying, and that's the last thing that I really remember. My husband and my dad, I guess my knees gave way, I don't know, whatever. They set me down in a chair, and my husband took the phone, and I don't really remember much that night, except just I kept crying, but I kept saying, it doesn't make any sense. Why would it be her? It's a mistake. Somebody's made a mistake, or they got the wrong name, I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that it was her.
Tammy said Rose may not have told her about the affair because since Tammy had gotten married to David Limely and moved some distance away, the two were not as close as they once had been. But Rose's sister Margie Lowry told us she knew nothing about Roger either, and neither did Vicki Ruoff.
She did not tell me anything about him because she knew what I would tell her for dating a married man. She knew that I would be very upset. And I don't know how she fell in with a married man in the first place, because that was so totally out of character for her. I think she was super, super lonely. I never knew about him until they were killed. I had completely no idea that she was with him until they were. I was told that she was killed and that she was with a man. I don't even know if Rod told her he was married, because I do know he worked for the phone company and he came to her house to fix her phone or something. So I don't even know that she knew at the time that he was married, because that's what floored all of us was, did she know he was married, or did he leave that little detail out? She didn't go with married guys, and I'm just thinking he didn't tell her he was married, which I've thought that all along.
Vicki is not the only one who wondered whether Rose knew Roger was married. Her sister Margie told us she, too, is not sure whether Roger had been honest with Rose about that. But then, if Rose did not know that her lover was hitched to someone else, why did she keep their relationship a secret from her closest friends and family? As we shall see, there is evidence that Rose definitely knew Roger was married to someone else. Rose's reticence to let her family in on her secret may explain why she left Rachel with the Robertsons when she left on her tryst with Roger. Her family told us that Rose never, as a rule, left Rachel with anyone other than family, and they found it very odd that she had chosen this time to leave her daughter with someone the family considered a stranger. When Rose was killed, the family went into a panic because they did not know where Rachel was or whether she, too, had been harmed. Here is Rose's sister-in-law, Joan Halter.
Rosie took Rachel wherever she went, and that's why when we first heard the news, well, was Rachel with her? We couldn't believe she left her with a babysitter she had never left her with before. So we were all worried that Rachel was with her, and we were really relieved when we found where Rachel was.
Meanwhile, Roger, it was determined, had been employed at GTE since 1977 and had been married to Marcella, a part-time college student, for 7 years. The two had met as teens and married young, and it seemed that they were growing apart. Here is Marcella.
Roger and I both went to the same church. It was called, at that time, Second Evangelical United Brethren Church. And we were both in the youth group at the time. And that's where we became acquainted, and that's from that youth group is where we started dating from. He was 4 years older than I was, and at the time when I went to high school, we had 8th grade there at the high school, so it was 8th through 12th grade. And if I remember, he walked me to some classes, but the main contact that we had was in the youth fellowship group at church. I feel that he was because there was a, I think it's like an associational higher group that had people that represented our youth fellowship group, and he was like some kind of officer in that. So he was devoted to his religion, as far as I knew, and was a born-again Christian as far as I knew. So yes, and when we went to after we were married, well, before we were married, we taught, or we were youth fellowship directors or leaders, and then after we were married, we taught Sunday school and helped with children's church. He drove the church bus, so by all outward signs, he was devoted and committed.
In 1980, Roger and Marcella were having marital difficulties. Roger's family tells us that he had been unhappy for years. Marcella was quite religious, and according to people whose interviews we read or whom we talked to, was somewhat domineering and judgmental. Here is Larry Atkinson.
Marcella, we really, I guess it's just kind of a sense, or maybe the way she dominated or whatever, we never really liked her. The family just really didn't, tolerated her, but never cared for her. He wasn't real strong in the marriage. I mean, she really kind of dominated things, just an overpowering type person, and make you feel guilty with her Bible and stuff like that.
Marcella found out the hard way that she didn't know Roger nearly as well as she thought she did. Here she is.
Let me say that, to my knowledge, he didn't drink, so I don't know of anybody he would be going to the bar with and having a drink with, although, again, I've heard that apparently was not the case, that he did do that.
But taking the occasional drink, unbeknownst to his wife, was not the only transgression of Roger's. As we mentioned, in September 1980, Roger and Marcella had undertaken a 2-week favor babysitting at the home of a couple, members of their church, who were away. The Blacks had a preteen daughter who needed someone to stay with her because her college-age brothers could not be available the whole time, and someone needed to stay in the house and provide food and adult supervision. The weekend before the murders, Roger and Marcella had stayed at this house and babysat, and then on Monday, September 8th, Roger left St. Joseph and made the 210-mile drive northeast to Cahokia. There he would meet up with a crew of 6 guys from various other GTE locations. They were scheduled to be on this job site for 2 weeks, working through the weekend according to what Roger told Marcella. Marcella continued to stay at the Blacks' house and babysit alone. Roger and Marcella had been unable to have children, and they both wanted them very much. But that was not the only problem. As we said, Roger's family did not care for Marcella. Here is Marcella talking about the situation.
Well, for some reason, his mother never did like me. She really fought the fact that we were going together, and as a matter of fact, he left home because of that. He went into the service shortly after he left home, but he left home and went and lived with his parents' good friends until he went into the service. So he left home because of me, because his mother would not accept me and would not get along with me. Now, after we were married, she always seemed to kind of accept me and acted like, and she wasn't hard to get along with then. But after he died, of course, she was like, she wanted the family heirlooms back and things like that. Now that was his mom. His dad and I got along fine. There was no problem between the two of us. I thought we had a good relationship. I thought I had a good relationship with his brother Larry and his wife Liz. I thought there was a good relationship with Rita, his sister, and then his sister Wanda and Elaine and his brother Robin. I didn't feel like they didn't like me. And we spent a lot of time socializing with Rita and her husband Mike and with Wanda and her husband Kevin. So I felt like I was accepted into the family, except there was always kind of that undercurrent with his mom. And of course, she then wrote me some pretty, I thought, unnice answers. Unfriendly, not nice letters after he died. And I just fired a letter back to her and said, if that's the way you're going to be, I don't want to hear from you again. So, and I didn't realize that Larry had such animosity towards me. I felt like we were fairly good, fairly friendly with each other, but there's just those accusations that they won't let go.
Elizabeth Atkinson, Larry's wife, stated in her interview with police 5 days after the murders that Marcella was difficult to get along with. Mike H., married to Roger's sister Rita, told police that Marcella was domineering and tried to always know where her husband was. His wife Rita stated baldly that her husband did not like Marcella. And it seemed that maybe Roger did not care for Marcella too much either. 32-year-old Roger had a bit of a wandering eye. In fact, his eye was not all that wandered. Roger was known by certain of his work colleagues to cheat on his wife. He had several affairs with women that are reflected in the police file and were acknowledged by his GTE co-workers in their interviews. After his death, Marcella was stunned to learn of her husband's prolific love life outside their marriage and that he had even done it close to home. Marcella's friend and matron of honor, Cheryl, later told her this story. One day, she saw Roger while he was working during the day at GTE, and he asked if her husband and Roger's good friend, Rick Cowden, would be home that evening. She said no, he was out of town. Roger said, "Then I'll be over this evening." Cheryl thought that he was merely joking, but that night, sure enough, he showed up at her home. She was surprised because she did not realize he was serious. She didn't let him in. Another friend of Marcella's, Diana Kirsten, told Marcella that her sister stated that Roger tried to pick her up. Here is Marcella in her own words.
Cheryl Fountain was a friend of mine, a pretty close friend. We went to high school together, and then her husband Ricky and Roger and I, the four of us, we did a few things together. When she told me that he had come to her house and the conversation that had preceded that was shocking. It's like, what? I mean, that's pretty nervy to hit up on my good friends. he always was very friendly to people, but not just women, to men too. I mean, just he was a very personable, likable, friendly guy. I don't think he ever met a stranger that he couldn't talk to. But I was not aware of, since I have found out that there were many, and I was not aware of that, especially some people that I thought were friends. So that hit me kind of hard. I would not have expected Roger to have been that kind of person. There was a young girl she was the pastor's daughter that lived a few doors down the street, and she used to come up and do a lot of flirting with him. And I had to talk with him and said, this is a high school girl. You shouldn't, there again, he's very friendly. And I thought just innocently friendly. And I said, you shouldn't really be talking to this girl like when she comes up. Don't encourage her because that's not good. She's a high school girl. And since I've heard that some night when, I don't know, I don't know when it was, but some night he went off with her and spent the night with her. Now I knew he kind of flirty with her and she was flirty with him, but that's a shock. I mean, that was jailbait, that was a high school girl. So, no, I didn't know of that either. That would have, in my mind, that would have pretty well done the marriage. Going off with the high school girl and doing that would have just been it for me.
Although the files we saw do not contain any information about this liaison with an underage girl, they do contain the names of at least 2 women whom Roger was known to have had affairs with before his relationship with Rose, one of whom was married. Larry Atkinson also told us that he knew about a local girl Roger had been seeing a couple of years earlier. Roger, it seemed, got around. It was an open secret at work that Roger was known to improperly install telephone lines in the homes of certain female customers of GTE, giving him an excuse to return to their houses later and flirt with the attractive homeowners. Investigators followed up on the stories they were hearing about Roger's MO of making errors in certain of his repair jobs so he could return to the site and revisit with the ladies. After reviewing call records at GTE, DCI agents confirmed that there were at least 2 and probably more occasions on which the customer callback was due to workman error. It seemed that Roger had done this before. However, as was the case with Rose, it seemed that Roger was somewhat selective in whom he shared his love life with. We know that he did not tell his siblings about the affair. We already heard from Elizabeth Atkinson about her shock at hearing that Roger had been found with a woman. He also did not tell his closest friends, Chip Allison and Doug Patterson, about his affairs. Here is Marcella.
His close friends that we knew of, as far as not working with him, didn't know of any of those things going on. But the GTE guys knew. They all knew what was going on. And can I insert this in there? I think they were all doing the same thing. Nobody wanted to say anything. So I think it was a very common thing that everybody was messing around with everybody else's wife or other women. And I think it must have been a ego thing for all of those guys, maybe who could get the most, or I don't know.
Roger's family alleges that this behavior, which would certainly have been frowned upon by his religious family had they been aware of it, was embedded in the boys will be boys culture embraced by the phone company employees Roger worked with.
We know that the phone company guys, a lot of them, were involved with women.
It was a game, and Roger was young.
And the coach or the leader of all this, we discovered later, was Mike, as kind of a challenge to him as to who he could get to go, off track.
This refers to Mike H., Roger's brother-in-law and fellow GTE employee. And Mike H. was not ashamed of his behavior. In one 1993 interview with the DCI, they asked him if he had been aware back in 1980 of any of Roger's personal problems. DCI notes state that, quote, he advised affirmatively, stating Roger was always dicking around with girls, but who wasn't back then? He advised that Roger kind of made passes at them all. But this behavior did not stop at just harmless flirting. Affairs were rampant, and since it seemed that everyone knew each other, this contributed to tensions and jealousies. We've seen that Roger was involved with several women outside his marriage. His colleague, Mike H., who Larry and Elizabeth Atkinson termed the ringleader, was also guilty of this. His affair with a neighbor eventually broke up his marriage to Roger's sister, Rita.
Mike was having an affair with the neighbor lady. He would slip out the back door to go visit the neighbor lady that worked for the Highway Patrol in St. Joe.
He ended up marrying her.
Yeah, he ended up marrying her.
Marcella, too, did not care for Mike H.'s philandering ways.
I had been told by my aunt that Mike, even though he was married to Rita, he was still hitting on a former girlfriend and wanting to still go out with her and things like that, and I didn't care for that. Mike, to me, was egotistical and thought he was a real woman's man, and that just didn't set well with me, so I just didn't care for him.
And there are stories that Mike H. was secretly sleeping with the fiancé of another brother-in-law, Robin Atkinson.
He slept with one of LJ's brother's fiancée.
This was true. Mike H. told investigators in one of his interviews that Robin had been engaged to a woman named Tony 4 or 5 years earlier. Robin had suspected that his brother Roger was sleeping with Tony, but in reality, it was Mike H. who was having an affair with her. He was married to Rita, Roger's sister, and sleeping with Roger's brother's fiancée. Robin apparently was very angry with Roger, believing him to be the cheater, and Gary S., another relative by marriage, told Mike that Robin had said he had a bullet out for Roger. In short, although Roger was an upstanding citizen in terms of his personal habits, not smoking or drinking much, attending church regularly, maintaining a stable home with his wife and a steady job, saving the planet with his commitment to solar energy, he was a womanizer. And he was not very good at hiding it, although it seems he did manage to hide it from one key person, his wife. Sorting out this whole thing was a real challenge for investigators. There seemed to be endless numbers of people who had secrets, affairs, grudges. Here is Paul Holes.
In taking a look at any case, victimology is huge. So, initially, as I'm learning about this case, I'm reading about, Roger, I'm reading about Rose, I'm finding out these two were having an affair, Roger was married, and we all know, that this type of affair situation does lead to homicide in select instances. And so it is a motive.
Not only was Roger known to have dalliances outside of his marriage, his family even said that beginning about 3 years before the 1980 murders, they believed that Roger was on the brink of leaving Marcella. Larry told us that Roger sought him out to seek his advice on whether he should ask for a divorce because he was conflicted.
There was a time, I don't know what it was, 2-3 years before the death, that he was asking, I guess, my opinion of divorce. And I kind of left it up to him, because my family, we never had any divorces, and so it was almost a no-no type thing. And he wanted to get a divorce and wanted to know what my opinion was. I guess he was trying to feel out what the family, of course he didn't want the family turning on him if he did such a thing.
I knew that Roger had been discussing with LJ about wanting a divorce from Marcella. She would bring the Bible out and point to him in the Bible where it would be wrong for him to leave her under any circumstances.
Elizabeth even stated that she was surprised that Roger had stayed with Marcella all this time. According to Roger's family, Marcella was a devout Catholic and did not believe in divorce. If Roger brought up the notion of divorce with her, she would refer him to biblical passages prohibiting it or even threaten to harm herself. Elizabeth stated that she felt that if Roger had ever left her, Marcella might have killed herself. Roger, Atkinson family members allege, was over a bit of a barrel when it came to his marriage.
Things just kept deteriorating. He wanted to start his life. He wanted to get married to someone that could have children because she couldn't, apparently. And but she would have nothing to do with it, and Roger didn't know how to stand up for himself. He couldn't just say, I'm leaving. So he stayed instead of leaving like he should have.
Larry tells us that Roger also confided in his pastor about his desire for a divorce and sought the man of the cloth's input on whether he should proceed. We also know that he talked to a friend named Frank Waller, who said that Roger had come to him about a month prior to his death and told him that he was having marital problems and contemplating divorce. Marcella spoke with us at length about what was going on with her and Roger in the summer of 1980. She said,
No, he didn't act normal. I thought there was something wrong. I pretty well knew there was something wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it, except I thought it involved his younger sister Elaine. Roger's mom and dad moved to Tucson, Arizona, and left Elaine at home. And they asked Roger to look after his little sister in their absence. So that left him as kind of in charge of making sure she was okay. Well, we found out that summer, and I'm going to say probably June or maybe even May, that Elaine had met this guy in riding the bus to the college. She had met this older man who we thought was still married and had some children. She had met him and had begun a relationship with him. So Mike and Rita met at our house, and we had Elaine and this boyfriend to come, and the family had a discussion with him about the fact that he was too old for her, that he was married and he had children, and she was only about 19. And we felt that that was not a good situation. At the time, I think he was 42. So Roger was very upset about that and felt that he should have probably had more control over that situation. So I thought that's why he was so odd acting that whole summer.
On his watch, Roger's teenage sister had embarked on an affair with a married bus driver more than twice her age who had kids. Elaine later ended up marrying this man named Jack Owens, and the two moved to Tucson, Arizona. Despite believing that the trouble with Elaine was the source of Roger's odd behavior that summer, Marcella slowly became aware that something else was going on. She said that for a long time, it didn't even occur to her that Roger would stray outside the marriage.
Well, at the time, I think I thought Roger had a strong enough character, was committed enough in his Christian life that would not affect him that much. So I don't remember ever worrying much about that. I had a lot of faith in Roger. I felt that he was committed to me because I was committed to him, and I just felt he was a Christian man, and I didn't worry about that much.
But then it became apparent that
there was a strain there that I couldn't explain. I asked him if there was anybody else, if there was somebody else that he had found. And his response was, there could be a couple of women up in the Savannah area that he could fall into the father role of their children, but no one in particular. I was speechless. I didn't know what to say. It's like, what do you say to that?
She steeled herself to ask him about his feelings about the state of their marriage.
I thought that at the end of that conversation that I said, well, are you thinking of divorce? And his response was, I don't know. And again, I was like, what? I didn't know where he was coming from. I didn't understand it. And so I didn't question it because I think I was just dumbfounded. I didn't know. I guess I found it hard to believe.
On the other hand, it does seem that Marcella looked the other way and ignored the obvious signs that her husband was not happy, almost in denial about a possible end to their marriage.
He never asked me for a divorce. There was no plans for a divorce. His mother and his brother and them all say that he was going to divorce me. Well, if he was, he never told me. He did make that comment that I said that he made that statement that he didn't know, but there never was any plans of going through with a divorce or any plans that were leading to that I know of. Now, whether he told them something different, I don't know.
In a symbolic act of how little he valued his marriage, Roger stopped wearing his wedding ring quite some time before his death. Marcella told us that, quote, he had an accident with his table saw when he wore his ring. The ring caught in the saw about ripped off his finger, so he didn't wear it after that. How ironic that Roger would eventually lose a finger, chopped off by a blade of a different sort during his murder. Marcella verified the story about Roger confiding in his pastor. She said that Roger had been acting odd and distant all summer.
2 weeks before Roger was killed, he was, he kept acting so strange and so upset that, I knew something was wrong, but didn't know what. So I advised him to go talk to a former minister that we had, and he did. And when he came back, there was no discussion about what you talked to him about. He seemed to be a little better. That was the extent of that. Well, there was something that week that just kept telling me something wasn't right. And so I thought, I'm going to go talk to that minister and ask him some questions and see if I can find out what's going on. So I drove up to Stanberry, I believe it was, during the day because Lisa was in school, and talked to this minister. And I asked him, I said, is there somebody else? And his reply to me was, I think you need to go back and talk with Roger.
Marcella had this conversation with the minister on September 12th, the day Roger and Rose checked into the Amana Holiday Inn. Whether or not she chose to bury them, Marcella's instincts were right. Roger was having an affair, and it was not just a fling. Consistent with his MO for meeting women, Roger met Rose while installing a phone line at her home in June 1980. They had been seeing each other since then, 3 or 4 months. It was clear that Rose was smitten with Roger. Remember, found in her car was a crossword puzzle book that had written on it, I love you, Roger Atkinson, Roger, Rose, and Rachel. And the notebooks in her home had similar flowery sentiments. And as we heard, Rose's high school friend, Tammy Berkman, who was close with Rose, said she never would have dated a married man unless she believed he would leave his wife for her. Roger, in turn, told his colleague and relative through marriage, Gary S., that yes, the affair he was having was important enough to foul up his marriage over. And since he made very little effort to conceal the affair from everyone other than Marcella, it seems he, too, maybe believed that it was more than just a flash in the pan. Roger and Rose had various methods of communicating on the down low. When Rose wanted to talk to Roger, she would have a male friend or coworker call the Atkinson home and pretend to be a colleague of Roger's, usually a guy named Randy Cole, and ask to speak to Roger. Marcella was none the wiser. And after Roger's death, Marcella discovered that he had been phoning Rose from their home, calling collect so the calls would not be reflected on the phone bill. The two managed to steal quite a bit of time together. Rose's mailman, Ed Sprague, stated that he had seen a GTE truck outside Rose's residence 4 to 6 times in midday. And, as we saw from the Hickey incident, Roger would stop over at her house in the morning as well. There is some indication that people in Roger's life did not approve of his affair. His sister Rita H., who was married to Roger's work colleague Mike, notes that it was her husband, not her brother, who told her about her brother's affair with Rose. Mike had told her several weeks before the murders that Roger met Rose while installing her phone. Here are the DCI notes summarizing their interview with Rita H.
Rita told investigators that in reference to her knowledge of Rose Burkert, she heard from Mike that Rose was going out on Wednesday. With regard to the trip, Rita stated that Rose was just going to stay there for 3 or 4 days and that she was going to drive out, and she stated that Mike told her this in a factual basis. She stated that she told him, "You're kidding," and it didn't sound like Roger to her, and she stated that Mike doesn't approve either. She and Mike did not approve of Rose going to stay with Roger in Cahokia, and it didn't sound like something Roger would do. She said that Mike told Roger that he should not have his girlfriend be visiting him in Cahokia, and he shouldn't be seeing anyone else while he was married. Rita stated that Mike told Roger that she, meaning Rose, shouldn't go there to Cahokia, and that he shouldn't get involved while he was married.
All this judginess from Mike H. is pretty rich, considering he himself had engaged in multiple affairs, including one at the very time of the murders. Roger's colleague and brother-in-law's brother, Gary S., also told investigators in his interviews with them that, quote, he, along with Mike H., kind of warned Roger not to tell anyone if he was going to be fooling around. Gary could not give any explanation as to why they had actually warned Roger, other than the fact that they did not think it was cool that Roger would be out openly fooling around with someone else other than his wife and letting everyone know about it. In a subsequent interview, Gary S. said that they were concerned for Roger's job because employees at GTE tended to gossip and blow things out of proportion, and word of the affair could have gotten back to Roger's wife. Investigators quickly figured out that the list of people who were aware that Roger was cheating on his wife with Rose was quite extensive. But the affair between Roger and Rose wasn't the only thing that investigators uncovered that could provide some insight into why the couple was killed. There was also quite a bit of drama surrounding Rose's life. For one thing, as we touched on in episode 1, Rose's family life was very complicated, with parental remarriages on both sides, lots of partial siblings, and acrimonious relationships between Rose and her mother, Marjorie, and stepfather, Lyle Tharp. Vicki Ruoff told us about Rose and her mother.
It's safe to say they didn't have the best relationship.
Tammy Berkman told us,
I never met her mom. I met her dad and his wife, Bet, that she grew up with. And that's who she lived with. And when you would talk to her about mom, you were talking about Bet. And she didn't call her Bet, she called her mom. And as far as she was concerned, she didn't have a biological mom. That's what she always told me. And, if I asked her anything about it, she was like, to me, she just don't exist. I don't want to talk about it. But she never went into detail about what it was about. She wouldn't ever really talk about her.
Margie Lowry told us flat out that Rose did not like their mother, and that their mother's husband, Lyle Tharp, was corrupt, abusive, and at least on occasion, very violent. There was also some drama involving a son of Lyle's, the man whom we're referring to as Kay. We will discuss more about Lyle and his son Kay in a future episode. But Rose's tumultuous family life was just the tip of the iceberg. There was plenty of other stuff going on with her that seemingly could be related to her untimely end. Kathy Rourke, Rose's sister, said that Rose visited Kathy at her home on the morning of September 9th, and Rose told her that she felt that someone had recently been following her. This was not the first time that Rose felt this way. Rose's friend Vicki told us that Rose had recently experienced some very scary events.
She was really scared. She said, I'm getting tired of looking over my shoulder, and really the only place she really felt safe was at work. She changed the locks on her doors 3 or 4 times, but still, people would come in her house.
Not only did Rose have someone she felt was in her home at night, she had people peering in the windows watching her.
I think she had mentioned something about that, yeah. She got afraid to stay by herself there at the end.
Sheriff Rotter told us that this was true.
There was a young gentleman who had a certain affection for Rose and had been caught window peeking, and it believed that he actually had entered her house. It was a person that lived very close by, if not maybe across the street. It was a younger person, early 20s, and had just really taken an affection for her. And I believe, and although these are crimes that were never actually solved back then, so us solving it today is not very likely, but I believe that he probably did come into her room, maybe to steal some undergarments or something, and maybe had even been in there when she was home in bed. I think those things are all real. Whether they have anything to do with this, I kind of doubt it, but it was certainly a suspect that was being looked at.
And Margie Lowry told us that
she came home one day and the windows were open, and she never left her windows open. The landlord's son or grandson or whatever came into the house and opened up the windows, and it just, it's just unsettling whenever you work a night shift, an evening shift, and you come home in the middle of the night and you find this.
the police questioned the landlord's son and determined that he just had a teenage crush on Rose. Rose also apparently got bad vibes from Scott, the lawn guy hired by her landlord. Here is Vicky.
He was wanting to date her and she wasn't interested.
Margie also confirmed the story told by others that Rose felt she was being followed.
She reported a couple of times the fact that she felt like she was being followed from work to her home. She reported it to the police. She filed a report. And even one of the deputy sheriffs followed her home one night to see if somebody was following her from work. Whenever I was there one time, and Vicky and her were talking about it, and sometimes she would go to Vicky's because if she felt like she was being followed, she didn't want to go to her house. She wanted to go somewhere where somebody else was.
Rose was distressed enough about this that she made the declaration to Kathy on September 9th, 3 days before her death, about who she would like to raise Rachel if something were to happen to her. There was more. Rose had recently gotten a dog given to her by Vicky's parents, and the newspaper reports about the case consistently report that Kathy Rourke, Rose's sister with whom she was closest, told investigators that Rose came home to find this dog killed. Now, we reached out to Kathy for this podcast in part to confirm this story, but unfortunately, she did not feel emotionally equipped to reopen these old wounds. Margie Lowry, another of Rose's sisters whom we spoke with, confirmed that she believed the dog was deliberately killed, but she could not verify the details. But Vicky Ruoff told us,
she had a dog that my mom and dad had given her, and she came home one night and it was hanging from the tree and it had been gutted.
Now, according to law enforcement, this is not true, and the dog story is one that has been blown way out of proportion. But another dog, one that Joan and J.C. Halter had given to Rachel, disappeared and was never located. Here is Joan Halter.
That was actually before Rosie passed away. We got her a puppy. And that was in St. Joe, Missouri. And then when all this came about, the puppy was missing and we advertised and never did hear anything back.
Rose also told her friends that someone was leaving disturbing notes on her car while she was at work. We don't know what these notes said, but she was feeling unsettled by them and the feeling that she was being watched. Vicki told us about another thing that was upsetting to Rose in her last months. Rose was troubled enough that she refused to see Vicki in person, despite having been friends for 8 years. Here is Vicki.
She would call me on her break at my house, and I kept telling her, well, come on over. And she would hem-haw, no, I can't. And finally, one night, I just point blank asked her, I said, okay, I know you too well. I go, what's going on? Because I said, I've not seen you face to face. You won't come over to my house. You don't want me to come to your house. And she said, well, I've gotten involved in something that you wouldn't want me involved in, and you told me not to get involved in, and someone had gotten her involved in a cult, and she was wanting out. And she said she was told there was only one way out, and she said, I cannot let anybody know that I know you, that I know where you live, because I'm afraid they'll come hurt you to prove a point to me. So she said, I'll call you, from work and stuff. And so she did that for a while, and then finally we were supposed to get together that Saturday night. But when I thought about it later, I thought, well, maybe she knew she wasn't going to be home, and she said, okay, we will get together, just so that she was trying to keep me from having trouble.
Vicki told us that she had not seen Rose in months, that Rose seemed to be avoiding seeing her in person, and then, when they had finally made a plan to hang out on Saturday, September 13th, Rose was dead. And she had seemed very, very afraid of a cult that she had gotten mixed up in, and believed that the only way out was
her death.
Vicki told us that she tried to persuade Rose to confide in her about this cult.
I did try. I told her, I said, tell me what's going on, and I said, we'll get you out of it, and she would, if Rose didn't want to tell you something, you were not going to find out, because she had a stubborn streak in her, and if she didn't want you to know something, she wasn't going to tell you. And I pleaded with her, because I said, look, I'm tired of this, just talking on the phone. I want to see you. I said, tell me what. And she said, no, I'm not going to get you involved.
Contemporary articles that we found make mention of cattle mutilations in Iowa attributed to cultist groups. A September 20th, 2009 article in the St. Joseph News Press stated, quote, authorities told the news press at the time that the ultimate goal of these groups was human sacrifice. These newspaper articles cite cultist activity as one theory in the case. We were not able to confirm Rose's cult affiliations in any of the files that we reviewed, but Vicki is convinced that Rose's fear was genuine. According to a source, Rose's friend Tammy Howard Berkman introduced her to this cult, and Rose felt that she had gotten in over her head. All of the things that Rose was facing, Vicki said.
To me, she was more concerned about the cult thing.
Tammy Berkman denied this in her conversations with us. The closest thing to an expert on the case, Sheriff Rotter, told us that he had not seen any specific references to cult activity with regard to Rose, but that there is some very strange satanic stuff that they found among her personal items. This was in the form of a notebook they found at Rose's home, with her writings inside. Here is Sheriff Rotter.
For some reason, she was taking some kind of interest in those types of things, and she had some things that were written in her notes that were dealing with satanic rituals and whatnot. Now, whether she was just looking at, basically looking at it as a student would look at anything, or if she actually had an interest, it seemed to me, just in the context of the notes, that she's listening to someone speak on the subject. Now, whether she's listening to them in person, one-on-one, or she's at some event or something that she's watching a film or television show or something, I don't know what the context of the source is, but she's taking notes about things that are being said by others, and just about Satan and different processes that you would go through maybe to worship Satan and things like that. There's nothing in there that would lead you to the idea that she believes in it or adheres to it. And she may have, I don't know. It's just she's taking notes of what's being said by someone else. There's no question from her notes that this wasn't a Jehovah's Witness thing. This was definitely a satanic oriented type study that she was doing.
This information about satanic writings is very strange, and cognizant of the overblown satanic panic of that era, we are hesitant to attribute too much to the fact that Rose seemed to have an interest in it. But perhaps she got in over her head in something she did not anticipate. Again, Sheriff Rotter.
She's talking with someone about this, and she's making references to so-and-so says this and so-and-so says that. So it could have been that they had an interest in her and wanted her to join something, and now she's getting a little nervous because, well, maybe we were just interested in it, we're not really want to be part of it, and now they're trying to recruit her into it. I think that's probably very possible. There's no question, though, that she had an interest in it.
As for Roger, there were some things going on with him that were also of interest to investigators. Obviously, with his history of romantic entanglements, there was plenty to look into in his personal life. But a couple of witnesses also indicated that Roger had recently become paranoid. Marcella even told police and other family members that Roger had taken to placing a chair back under the hotel room door when they stayed at a hotel the weekend before in observance of their anniversary.
I just thought it was really odd behavior.
Roger was seemingly worried about someone attempting to enter the room. What was the reason for this precaution? Police wanted to know. And there were rumors that Roger had argued with someone before he left town for Cahokia. Here is Margie.
He was in an argument with somebody up there in Savannah, and they took Rosie's car, and they registered the room in Rosie's name because he was a married man.
Investigators interviewed Roger's co-workers from GTE who were on site in Cahokia with him that week. They searched the room he had stayed in at the Cahokia Motel. They obtained a list of the guest registry at the motel for the entire week, and they verified the daily work reports for each of the employees. And they processed Roger's work vehicle. Inside were found a couple of love letters from Rose and personal items belonging to Roger. Nothing of apparent evidentiary value was found inside the truck. Investigators also learned that Roger had spent 2 weeks in Iowa in July 1979 in connection with a training class he had attended with work colleagues at the General Telephone Company offices in Grinnell. They obtained a list of students in this class and tracked them down on the theory that perhaps Roger had made an enemy in Iowa while he was there the last time. They even followed up on phone records of calls made by Roger from his hotel in Iowa to Iowa numbers. It does not seem that anything came from all these investigative efforts. Another complicating factor inhibiting resolution to the case was the apparent lack of motive. The motive for the murders did not appear to be robbery. As we have seen, although Rose's purse was emptied out, her wallet, seemingly untouched, lay on the bed. Here is Paul Holes.
This is such an interesting aspect to this case. Is if this was a financially motivated crime, why isn't he digging into Rose's wallet more to see what she has in there?
Her traveler's checks and jewelry remained in place. Nothing was missing other than the cash that Roger had been carrying. It was believed that he had about $200 in GTE expense money on him. He was given $400 in cash prior to the trip, as well as $200 in traveler's checks. It's not clear why investigators believed that he had $200 remaining. Perhaps they ran through the expenses he had paid over the 5 days he stayed in Cahokia. But whether it was $200 or a little more, the general feeling among investigators was that this was not enough to kill 2 people over. Paul Holst told us that
the offender's actions and his behaviors often give insight as to the potential motive.
this seems logical, but in this case did not seem to hold up. The killer left behind seemingly random, unexplained clues such as the soap writing, the toothpaste, and the ripped-up photo that did not help investigators understand the crime and, in fact, confused them even more. An article in the St. Joseph News Press on September 17, 1980, reports that DCI Supervisor Tim McDonald, quote, has admitted that some headway has been made concerning a possible motive for the weekend slayings. What that motive was suspected to be was not disclosed. And the DCI's statement seemed to be contradicted by the Iowa County Sheriff. Sheriff Spurrier was quoted in the Cedar Rapids Gazette in an article dated September 19, 1980, saying, "We have no motive. All their belongings were in the room. There were a lot of traveler's checks." In this same article, Sheriff Spurrier was quoted as saying that this was no robbery. This was revenge. Tim Trishman, the hotel manager, says incoming Sheriff Slockett shared information about the investigation with him over the years, and that
Sheriff Jim Slockett, for many years, we talked about this until I left the state in 1992, that he really felt that, this was an act of revenge.
Detective Jim Wright of the St. Joseph PD, drawing on his 29 years of experience in criminal investigations, told the St. Joseph News Press, quote, "I certainly think it was someone who knew them. My opinion after 29 years in the business is that it was just some kind of a vindictive type of homicide." Sheriff Rotter.
I thought it was a crime of passion just in the when you look at how violent it was. It would be hard to think that somebody just off the street would come in and cause that kind of damage to somebody and kill them in such a way if they weren't really upset about something.
To everyone investigating the case, the lack of financial motive, the absence of forced entry, and the lethal silence of the weapon used to murder 2 people in a crowded hotel meant that these murders were personal and planned. And Roger's family, at least, agrees. As Roger's brother Larry Atkinson told us,
we're very, confident that the person knew them.
As Tammy Berkman put it to us,
if I could just find out who, it would probably tell me why.
As in any murder case, it helps investigators hone in on a suspect to get an understanding of who would benefit from the death of the victim. And of course, discovering who would profit or improve their circumstances from the death of the victims helps in determining motive. Kathy Rourke was a sister of Rose. She told police that she could not think of anyone who would have benefited at all from Rose's death. There were no life insurance policies that she was aware of. Police looked into a family property that was owned by Rose's mother, but it does not seem that this was valuable enough for Rose to be murdered over. Rose did not have a substantial amount of money, and her family told us that she would not have been carrying a lot of cash. Detectives did learn that about a month before Rose's death, her purse had been stolen. She and Roger were at a bar and left their table to dance. While they were gone, someone stole Rose's purse from under the table. Her wallet with ID and cards and her other belongings were never found. It is unknown whether this was just a coincidence or whether the person who took her purse had nefarious motives beyond just petty theft. After Rose's death, her young daughter Rachel was taken in by Rose's sister, Kathy. She took care of the little girl until formal custody arrangements could be finalized. Per Rose's wishes, Rachel was remanded to the custody of her half-brother, J.C. Halter, and his wife, who lived in Minnesota. J.C. was Rachel's godfather and was involved in the little girl's life from the beginning. Here is his widow, Joan Halter.
back in the day, it was called an interstate compact because we were out of state, and I'm sure we hired a lawyer, and he had to advertise for her real father, but he didn't show up, so it took us like 5 months to get her. I always say it seemed like it was longer than a pregnancy at 9 months, just waiting for her. We were so anxious. She lived with Aunt Kathy until we could get her into the Minnesota.
Rose had lived with JC and his wife Joan for a short period when Rachel was born, and they helped support her while she got back on her feet. Even though she eventually moved into her own place, they stayed close, eventually moving next door to the couple before they moved to Minnesota. Here is Joan.
Before we moved, we saw her. We lived right next door, and he'd come home and have to go see her. She'd let him wake Rachel up. We were both very close to Rosie. Well, we became really close after JC and I got married, and we'd go shopping together. And in fact, she lived with us for a little bit, and then she went with some friends when Rachel was just a baby, just for a week or so, and then she went with another friend. But we brought her to the hospital.
Rose and Rachel had vacationed with the Halters in the spring of 1980. Kathy Rourke told investigators that in one of her last conversations with her sister, on Tuesday before she died, Rose said that if anything should happen to her, she wanted Rachel to be raised by J.C. Halter. Margie confirms this.
Because we knew that Rosie had stated that because they had no children and we did, that's who she wanted to raise Rachel should anything happen to her. It was just in a conversation that we had one time.
And here is Joan Halter, who ended up raising Rachel as her own with her husband, Rose's brother, J.C.
Before she left, she went to her sister's house to do her laundry, and she said, if anything happens to me, I want J.C. and Joni to take Rachel. That was so weird, and then it happened that same weekend.
We will discuss whether or not JC's desire to raise little Rachel could have been a motive for murder in a later episode. On Roger's side, there was only one financial beneficiary of his death, his wife, Marcella. Despite the involvement of multiple investigative agencies, the case stalled. An October 9, 1980 article in the Cedar Rapids Gazette quotes DCI Supervisor Tim McDonald saying, I am afraid we are in for a long investigation. There are 5 investigators working on tons of leads. By December, that number of investigators working full-time on the case was down to 3. Outgoing Iowa County Sheriff Bill Spurrier called the case the most perplexing one he'd come across in his 32 years of law enforcement. And DCI Director Shanahan termed it a very difficult investigation. Follow-up interviews of persons connected to the case continued well into the following year. On the first anniversary of the murders in September of 1981, the St. Joseph News Press ran an article quoting officials as saying they were still pursuing leads in the case. DCI Director Gerald Shanahan was quoted as saying, "We are still very much involved. We continue to check any and all possible leads in the case. We are not going to give up until the case is closed." Shanahan went on to say that the DCI agents had checked out hundreds of leads in an investigation that had reached into just about every state in the nation. There had been 10 states that had sent in information that required additional follow-up. Shanahan soberly remarked that as their probe was reaching somewhat of a crisis stage, with everyone wondering whether it would ever be solved, he was pulling together a team of the state's top homicide investigators to review the case file with a fine-tooth comb. He said, "The FBI was contacted and went over the entire case file. As a result of their study, they have submitted to our agency a psychological profile of the person or persons sought in the Amana case." He would not comment further on this, and we were unable to obtain a copy of this profile. Sheriff Rotter told us that it was not helpful.
It fits practically half of the population. So I don't know that there's a whole lot to be gained from that. But again, I understand why they did it, and I respect the work that they put into it. It's just it doesn't tell us who did it. We have so many suspects now and so many different reasons that somebody would have a motive that the profile really doesn't help us much.
The case plodded on for years. Investigators traveled back and forth between Williamsburg and St. Joseph, desperately working to solve the puzzle of who had taken the lives of the young lovers on a secret tryst at the Holiday Inn. Sheriff Slockett told the media that he had been to St. Joseph multiple times while investigating the case, had conducted several polygraph exams, and had sent officers as far away as Colorado in pursuit of pertinent information. In 1983, he said that new information came to light early that year that rekindled his investigation, despite the FBI and DCI not making significant headway. Slockett threw a little shade on the DCI, saying, "My opinion is that the only thing the DCI is good for is to give press releases," as quoted in a May 7, 1983 article. By November of that year, Sheriff Slockett seemed to remain hopeful. An article in the St. Joseph Gazette said that investigators had recently come up with some new leads. We will address the 1983 leads in another episode. But the Gazette article went on to say that the paper had recently been contacted by a relative of Roger Atkison's who said he was fed up because no one seemed to be concerned about solving the case. The case file amounted to 14 volumes of information by 1992, and it got larger after a 1993 follow-up investigation, which we will discuss in future episodes. This concludes episode 4. Please join us next week as we begin our discussion of the many suspects in the murders of Rose and Roger. If you have any information about the murders of Roger Atkison and Rose Burkert, please contact the Iowa County Sheriff's Office at 319-642-7307. Scene of the Crime is a production of AbJack Entertainment. It's narrated by me, Jamie Rice, and co-produced by Jessica Betancourt, Gray Hughes, and Mike Morford. It's written by Jessica Betancourt. Special thanks goes out to the family members and friends of Roger Atkison and Rose Burkert who participated in this podcast. Thanks also goes out to Sheriff Rob Rotter and the Iowa County Sheriff's Department, Paul Holes, Ron Fisher, Tim Trishman, and Ida Block. If you'd like to help Scene of the Crime reach new listeners, be sure to subscribe to the show and leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please recommend this podcast to your friends. You can find Scene of the Crime on Twitter at Scene of Crime Pod and on Facebook.